Pope Francis has revealed in his forthcoming autobiography that he was targeted by suicide bombers during his visit to Iraq, but was saved by a tip-off from British intelligence.
You used an adjective, conservative. That is, conservative is one who clings to something and does not want to see beyond that. It is a suicidal attitude.
Maria Elena, the only surviving sister of Pope Francis, has finally broken her silence after more than a decade shaking public opinion with revelations that had never before been made public. In a recent conversation, she opened up about their childhood memories in Buenos Aires, deeply personal family stories, and most notably the contents of a secret letter believed to shed light on a shocking truth related to the Catholic Church. Maria Elena revealed that her brother Jorge Mario Bergoglio, better known as Pope Francis, had chosen to remain silent on many sensitive issues within the Church. According to her, the reason behind his silence was his fear that disclosing the entire truth could lead to devastating consequences. She explained, "My brother chose to remain silent because if everything were to be revealed, the Church might never be able to recover." Maria Elena's disclosures have sparked intense reactions, not only within the Catholic community, but also around the world, igniting deep discussions about the role of truth and honesty in religious faith. Let us delve into Maria Elena's heartfelt reflections from Jorge's final torment-filled days to the regrets she had never before dared to speak aloud. 1. Maria Elena. A sister's heart speaks after the Pope's death. On Easter Monday, April 21, 2025, the Vatican officially released a statement. Pope Francis had taken his final breath at Casa Santa Marta. While the sad news didn't come as a complete surprise, he had been ill for many months. The world was still shaken, not only because a beloved pope had passed away, mourned by millions, but also because buried layers of memories and emotions suddenly resurfaced without warning. Thousands of kilometers away from Rome, a woman living quietly and almost completely unmentioned by the international media was perhaps experiencing a very personal loss. She is Maria Elena Bergoglio, Pope Francis's last surviving sister. For over a decade, she chose a discreet life in Argentina, far from public attention and the media spotlight. Not once did she leverage her famous brother's name for attention. Yet after the Pope's death at the age of 88, something inside her seemed to shift, a feeling of urgency, a pain long unspoken. And then she broke her silence. Maria Elena's first statement did not come from the Vatican's grand stage, nor was it drafted by the Church's media team. It came straight from her heart, simple, emotional, and hauntingly honest. On national television, her voice trembling, she said, "To me, he wasn't just the Pope. He was Jorge the boy who used to chase dogs around our yard, the one who made me laugh whenever I was sick, and the one who held me as we cried when our father died." She paused, seemingly, choosing her words with great care, but her next sentence stunned the entire studio. "I never wanted him to become Pope. It cost us more than anyone could ever imagine." A brief sentence, yet it echoed like a bell in the stillness of night. People began to wonder, what did she mean? What was the cost? And why now? Just days after Maria Elena's words were made public, global media and curious minds swiftly began to dig deeper. They revisited old milestones and posed a series of questions. Was there something she had kept hidden all these years? Why did she choose to speak only after her brother's death? But that was only the beginning. What she went on to reveal left the world astonished. Each story she shared opened a door into a rarely seen world, the private life of Jorge Mario Bergoglio. Born in 1948, Maria Elena was 12 years younger than Jorge. They grew up together in Buenos Aires in a traditional Italian immigrant household. Their father worked for the railway, while their mother was a devoted homemaker, deeply rooted in her Catholic faith. To Maria, Jorge was always the strong one, shunning crowds, disliking attention, and often quietly venturing into poor neighborhoods to help those in need. Many sources document their close childhood bond, though distance began to grow when Jorge joined the Jesuits and quickly rose through the ranks. And then when Jorge was elected Pope, the gap between them became more than just physical. The Vatican's strict protocols required that the Pope's relatives avoid public appearances. At that time, Maria Elena was battling illness, living quietly in a small convent outside the city, cared for by nuns. She had long retreated from the spotlight, becoming a shadowy figure on the margins of a global icon. When Pope Francis passed away, Maria Elena could not be in Rome. She had no chance to say goodbye, to hold his hand, one last time to attend his funeral. Her name wasn't even mentioned in any official farewell, and yet her silence rang louder than words, a stark reminder that behind the halo of a saint was still the image of a brother, a son, a man named Jorge. Jorge was the eldest of 5 siblings born in 1936 to an Italian immigrant family. As a young man, he studied while working to help support the family. At one point in a chemical lab, and later as a nightclub bouncer in the evenings, Maria recalled, "My brother was always quiet, but he always protected me. Even as a child, it was as if he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders." Before Jorge found the church, before the Vatican entered his life, there was another woman who lit the spark in his soul, their grandmother, Rosa. A strict, devout woman with unshakable morals and a deep longing for justice. Rosa was, according to Maria, the one who ignited the first flames in Jorge, compassion, repentance, and questions with no easy answers. Maria shared a painful childhood memory, a spiritual wound that Jorge carried with him all the way to Rome. "Something happened in our family," she said. "A betrayal, not of faith, but of blood." Jorge was the one most deeply hurt. According to her, when he was around 12, Jorge discovered that their father had a second family, a secret that had been hidden for many years. Maria didn't reveal names or details, but she was certain that from that moment, Jorge's childhood ended. His innocence was stolen, and from then on, he lived as if trying to atone for someone else's sins. That was the turning point. According to Maria, Jorge didn't come to God because he felt divinely guided, but because he was searching for an escape. "My brother didn't pursue the path of priesthood because he believed it was his life's calling. He was simply trying to escape his guilt," she said, her eyes cold and distant. That statement left even the most devout Catholics speechless. In 1969, he was officially ordained as a priest in the Society of Jesus. However, his journey diverged sharply from that of many other priests. At just 36 years old, only 4 years after ordination, he became the provincial superior of the Jesuits in Argentina, a position of immense influence during the country's politically turbulent times. By 1992, he was appointed auxiliary bishop of Buenos Aires and was soon promoted to archbishop. But this time, people didn't notice him for his title or position. They noticed his lifestyle. Jorge didn't use expensive cars, he had no personal chef, and he frequently visited the poor, the sick, especially those with AIDS, a group deeply stigmatized and neglected by society at the time. When the cardinals gathered in 2013 to choose a successor to Pope Benedict XVI, few believed Jorge would be selected. At 76 years old, he wasn't considered a top contender. But at a moment when the church was facing scandal after scandal, deep crises, and a loss of faith, people began to search for something truly different. And Jorge Mario Bergoglio was that choice. The moment he stepped out onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, the world fell into a hushed silence. Maria Elena, his younger sister, remembers that moment vividly. "I just hoped they wouldn't call his name," she later admitted in an interview. Not because he didn't deserve it, but because that burden was too heavy. It was a deeply honest, somewhat painful confession. Not a rejection, but the quiet fear of a sister who had witnessed both the light and shadows within her brother. Many believe it was the hidden corners of his past that forged Jorge into a resilient pope. He had known failure, endured criticism, and felt the sting of deep loneliness. Perhaps because of that, he didn't try to hide the church's wounds. He faced them head-on with courage. To Maria Elena, that's exactly why in her eyes he has always remained her beloved brother. Not a flawless saint, but a man who had stumbled, who had suffered, and who had learned to rise again through compassion. Maria Elena Bergoglio never left Buenos Aires. She lived a simple life with her sisters, tending a small garden, praying every day. A quiet woman who held on to memories that no one else could share, memories of her brother before he became a global icon. Not to deny the image of the Pope, but simply to remind the world that he was still a part of a family flesh and blood. The path of priesthood that Jorge Mario Bergoglio chose was always marked by silent sacrifices and solitude. While he entered a disciplined life of faith, his sister Maria Elena remained in the ordinary rhythms of life in Buenos Aires. Even though they followed different paths, they never felt far apart. At least not until 2013, when Jorge became Pope Francis. From that moment on, everything changed forever. When asked if she ever felt sad not being by her brother's side during those monumental moments, Maria Elena only smiled, a smile tinged with sorrow. "Now he belongs to the world, he's no longer just mine," she said. "I've accepted that, but I've never stopped missing him." It wasn't jealousy. It was a quiet sadness, the kind that surfaces when your last close relative becomes a towering symbol and you are left behind. And yet, as Pope Francis, once praised for his simplicity and compassion, stepped into the spotlight, his past began to resurface, brought forth by Marla. What if that humility wasn't just a virtue but a way to atone for past mistakes? Once again, Maria Elena stunned the world. She whispered, as if even the wind might overhear, "The Church never wanted me to reveal this. So what could be more terrible than everything we already know?" Stay with us, for in the next part we'll uncover what Maria refers to as the Vatican's secret dossier, a document she claims Jorge kept hidden until his death. And if what she reveals is true, its contents could change the history of the Church forever. 2. Secrets of corruption and abuse. Cover-ups that shook the Vatican. After Pope Francis passed away, Maria Elena finally agreed to participate in an interview. A conversation she had evidently pondered deeply before consenting to. Her voice did not tremble from emotion, but because she bore the weight of a truth no one wished to confront. "I struggled internally for many years to decide whether to reveal this," she confessed, "because it doesn't just involve my brother. It also pertains to the highest echelons of power within the Vatican." According to Maria, Jorge once believed that certain truths were ones the world was not yet prepared to accept, not because they were inherently evil, but because they could fundamentally shake the faith of millions of believers. Before his death, he had quietly compiled and organized a personal dossier consisting of letters, documents, and recordings, a file he named Il Dossier Nascosto, a secret dossier never publicly disclosed. Maria stated that even his closest advisors were unaware of its full contents. So how did she come to know about it? Maria Elena shared that she had kept this secret for over 10 years as a sacred promise to her beloved brother. During a visit home in 2012, when Jorge was still serving as Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he met her quietly at their mother's house, where he handed her a key and a sealed envelope. He didn't say much, she recalled, only instructed that if one day the Church fell into crisis, I would know what to do. At the time, Maria never imagined her brother would become Pope, so she placed the letter in a wooden box in her bedroom and dared not open it, fearing it might hurt Jorge. She only sensed that he was carrying something very heavy in his heart, evident in the anxious look she had never seen before. On the morning Pope Francis died amidst the grief of losing a loved one and the burden of responsibility, Maria Elena decided to open the envelope for the first time. What she discovered nearly overwhelmed her. A 3-page letter written in black ink with Jorge's trembling handwriting as if penned under extreme psychological stress. In the letter, Jorge confessed that he had uncovered a large-scale financial corruption network within the Vatican, linked to international banks and authoritarian regimes. He described concealed incidents involving high-level abuse, where influential cardinals used money and power to protect the perpetrators. I want to reveal everything Jorge wrote, but I fear that doing so would cause the church to collapse and the faith of billions to be lost. With a heavy heart, Maria Elena recounted that the letter did not name any specific individuals or organizations, but Jorge had left numerous subtle clues, including bank account numbers, initials of certain cardinals, and references to contracts signed in secrecy. He also revealed that the key she held was to open a hidden safe beneath the Vatican, where original documents proving his accounts were stored. "I'm not sure I have the courage to open that door," Jorge wrote, "but if I choose silence, it's because I want to protect the church, even though it causes me immense pain." Maria said she wept for hours after reading it, understanding that her brother had lived in an internal struggle between leadership responsibility and the fear of the consequences if the truth were exposed. She also revealed that in their last conversation before Jorge left Argentina, he had shared stories he heard from Jesuit priests about secret rooms deep beneath the Vatican housing sensitive documents that had existed for centuries. He said, "It was where the church hid things that should never come to light," she recounted. Though he didn't specify how he knew about the safe, Maria believed that Jorge had discovered it when accessing internal documents after becoming pope. Perhaps the most shocking aspect is Jorge Pope Francis's choice to remain silent. Not because he was covering up, but because he believed that if another global scandal erupted, the remaining faith would also collapse. He chose to quietly reform from within. However, according to Maria, in his final years, Jorge began to feel regret. He once whispered to me, she choked up, "Perhaps the church needs to be completely dismantled, to be rebuilt with honesty." Perhaps I was too weak. Maybe I should have been the Pope who ended the lies instead of sheltering them. That was Jorge Pope Francis's haunting confession in his final days, as recounted by his sister Maria Elena. But this was only the beginning of a series of more terrifying revelations Maria shared that a few weeks before his death, Jorge had tried to arrange for the secret dossier to be made public after his passing, but something or someone intervened. Maria stated that the dossier had disappeared from the designated storage location Jorge had specified. Vatican officials not only denied the existence of the file, but also evaded all related questions. Yet Maria remained steadfast. They know it's the truth, and they're afraid of what's inside. The biggest question is what in that dossier is so threatening that even a pope didn't dare to make it public. According to Maria, Jorge had spent many years investigating and exposing the silent tragedies, cases of abuse and mistreatment occurring in remote dioceses where cries for help were drowned in silence, where victims, mostly children from poor countries, were forgotten not only by the world, but also by the church itself, the institution that was supposed to protect them. Maria recounted that Jorge once said there was still a trove of unrecorded data incidents that bishops were instructed to conceal, bribes paid to silence witnesses, and priests quietly transferred, instead of being held accountable. Although Jorge had tried to reopen some cases, he was always obstructed by those in higher positions. And then, with his remaining strength, Jorge Pope Francis gave Maria a small wooden rosary. It held no material value, not gold, not adorned with precious stones, just old time-worn wood. But he told his sister, "This rosary once belonged to a boy in Argentina. He came to the church seeking help, but was turned away. A week later, he died." Jorge had kept that rosary for decades as a bitter reminder. Silence when choosing to ignore sometimes costs lives. Maria believed that rosary symbolized the pain her brother had endured, and was the reason she could no longer remain silent. It was not just a keepsake, but a final testament. But what pained her even more was the Vatican's refusal to acknowledge anything she said, from the rosary to the dossier to Jorge's deathbed promise. No official statement, not a single line of response. Only silence. A strange, almost deliberate silence. 3. The conspiracy of Pope Francis's successor. However, according to Maria, what she was about to reveal next was truly the most chilling aspect, the truth concerning Pope Francis's successor, and a secret agreement allegedly signed beforehand, even while Jorge was still alive. As the bells tolled throughout the Vatican and white smoke rose, signaling the commencement of a new papal era, the world rejoiced in welcoming the new pope. Yet few realized that behind these solemn ceremonies, everything had been orchestrated in advance. Maria Elena recounted that Jorge had once confided his deep concerns about his successor, not due to theological differences, but because of a covert pact he believed had been made by influential forces within the Roman Curia. "They have already chosen him," Jorge whispered to his sister one vulnerable evening, his voice hoarse like ashes. Maria, taken aback, asked, "Who are they, and why must you remain silent before them?" Jorge didn't respond immediately. He merely sighed and mentioned a name: Cardinal Matteo Taresco, a man distinguished by his polished appearance, compelling oratory skills, and hailed as a fresh breeze within the church. However, according to Jorge, beneath that polished exterior lay a far more troubling reality. Jorge told Maria that he had discovered a letter. In its contents, Cardinal Taresco was said to have made secret commitments to certain powerful groups within the Vatican, that if he were elected pope, he would not pursue investigations into the undisclosed files, especially those concerning abuse scandals that had occurred in South America, Africa, and Eastern Europe since the late 1980s. These were precisely the files that Jorge Pope Francis had diligently sought to investigate over many years, despite facing constant obstruction from an overwhelming and fearful bureaucracy. "They not only want the world to forget those matters," Jorge quietly said, "they want to erase every trace of them from historical memory." Maria found it hard to accept, but deep down she knew Jorge was not someone prone to baseless suspicions. The prolonged silence from the Vatican, the mysterious disappearance of sensitive documents, and the rapid glorification of the successor all compelled Maria to take action. Therefore, she decided to speak out, not to oppose the church, but to preserve a part of her brother's essence, the part he had buried for so long. In the following section, she intended to disclose everything she knew about Cardinal Matteo Taresco, the new pope, and why she believed Jorge had departed this life with his greatest regret, that the truth was once again buried beneath the white smoke rising from the Sistine Chapel. What would drive someone to conceal even more truths, especially at this particular moment? Maria Elena Bergoglio posed that question, not to anyone else, but to her own conscience. She recalled Jorge once saying that the Vatican had never been a unified entity. It was always a place of deep divisions between those who genuinely desired reform and those determined to maintain the status quo at all costs. For the latter group, revisiting the dark past not only threatened their reputation, but also directly endangered the power they held within the church. According to Maria, matters became even more concerning when Jorge's health deteriorated significantly at the end of 2023. Subtle yet unusual changes began to emerge. Jorge appeared less frequently in public. Informal conversations with independent journalists ceased. Most notably, he no longer mentioned the term accountability. Initially, Maria thought her brother was merely exhausted, but then fragments of the truth started to surface. Several of Jorge's closest aides, once considered allies in the reform journey, were suddenly reassigned or compelled to step down without any official explanation. They were replaced by entirely new faces, and according to an anonymous source within the Vatican, many of them had close ties to Cardinal Matteo Taresco, who had now become the Pope. Rumors circulated that Jorge had planned to release a groundbreaking apostolic letter calling for expanded access to concealed abuse records. However, just weeks before his death, that letter was set aside. That letter could have changed everything, Maria said, but it seemed it would never be published. What she implied, and few dared to acknowledge, was that in his final days, Jorge might have been outmaneuvered, not just by time, but by the very institution he once led. According to Maria, the Vatican had strayed from the reformist spirit that Jorge had long pursued. And his successor was not chosen for his faith, but for his commitment to continued silence, the very silence Jorge had endeavored to break. Then Maria shared something that sent chills down her spine. She said she had received an anonymous letter, just 3 sentences. Be careful with your words. Your brother died a glorious death. Don't make the world question that. No sender, no address, no signature, but enough to silence an ordinary person. Maria, however, would not be silenced. 4. Revelation. The evidence that exposes the truth. But Maria understood clearly. Jorge had not merely spoken empty words. He had left behind tangible evidence in a modest wooden chest, carefully hidden in the small house in Buenos Aires. Maria safeguarded the key to what she believed was the most explosive collection of documents in the modern history of the Catholic Church. Inside the chest were handwritten pages, the personal diaries of Pope Francis penned during the final 2 years of his life. These pages contained profound reflections, encrypted notes, and numerous cryptic references to individuals and events that had never been publicly disclosed. The true significance of these diaries lay not only in their authorship, but also in the timing of their creation. When Jorge was acutely aware that his time was limited, Maria recounted that Jorge began writing the diaries after experiencing a severe health crisis in 2023, a hospitalization that nearly claimed his life. In an emotional phone call, he told his sister, "I don't know how much longer they'll allow me to speak freely, but my hands can still write. I'll record the things my voice is no longer permitted to say." One of the first lines Jorge wrote was, "The wolves are closing in. My silence is no longer peace. It's fear disguised as obedience." From that moment on, Pope Francis's diaries seemed to chronicle a gradual decline, not only physically but also in his spiritual resistance. Jorge documented meetings with senior cardinals, whom he claimed pressured him to cease speaking about historical abuse cases. These individuals, rather than pursuing justice, urged him to prioritize the unity of the Church. But Jorge was not someone who could easily remain silent when the vulnerable needed a voice. One passage in the diary that particularly haunted Maria was where Jorge wrote, "To protect the institution by denying the truth is to crucify Christ once more. I have looked into the eyes of the victims. I have heard their stories. Yet I am still told to maintain diplomacy. But I was not made Pope to protect secrets. I was made Pope to serve God." Furthermore, Jorge left behind a dossier and a safe documents listing priests and bishops accused of abusing children in the United States, Australia, and Europe. According to the revelations, some influential cardinals had spent millions of euros to buy the silence of victims and transferred offending priests to other parishes instead of bringing them to justice. The financial evidence in the safe was even more horrifying. A detailed ledger, reportedly copied by a Vatican bank employee, listed monthly payments to government officials in several countries in exchange for tax favors and control over church assets. One particularly shocking transaction involved the illegal sale of an ancient monastery in Italy to a real estate company, with 50 million euros transferred to a secret account in Luxembourg. In another note, Francis wrote that he had attempted to reform the Vatican Bank by dismissing corrupt directors and hiring independent auditors, but every change encountered a wall of resistance and threats. Francis's discoveries did not stop at financial issues and abuse. A series of secret correspondences between cardinals and diplomats revealed that the Vatican had covertly funded political campaigns in several countries, including regimes that suppressed human rights to protect the Church's interests. These documents, carefully stored in the safe, included contracts signed with shell companies for money laundering, and a list of lavish gifts, such as gold watches and artworks given to foreign officials. Francis noted that he felt trapped in a labyrinth of sin, unable to bring the truth to light for fear of damaging the Church's sacred mission. Maria shared that her brother never intended to keep these revelations hidden. In one of their final conversations, he instructed her to release parts of the evidence when the time was right. However, now, Maria is uncertain whether that time will ever come. Since Jorge's death, she has reported receiving numerous requests from church emissaries and anonymous individuals urging her to surrender the diaries. They argue that doing so would be better for the Church, and that if misunderstood, the content could cause confusion and pain. Maria stated, "Jorge entrusted me with this, and now I understand why. the truth always causes discomfort before it can heal. According to Maria, the wooden chest contained more than just the diaries. Jorge had also left a sealed envelope marked with signs suggesting betrayal. No one, not even Maria, knows its contents. She mentioned being advised not to open it until she is entirely certain that doing so would not cause harm or lead to its confiscation. Some speculate that it may contain recordings, personal testimonies, or even a list of names related to the power struggles Jorge alluded to in his diaries. With the rise of Cardinal Matteo Tedesco, a figure Jorge once feared, Maria faces the most challenging decision of her life. Will she risk everything to reveal what her brother left behind? Or will she choose silence to preserve his dignity in death? This is the question Maria must confront as the situation grows increasingly tense. But the story does not end there. Recently, Maria disclosed that she had received messages from families of abuse survivors pleading with her to publish the diaries. They believe that Jorge may have documented truths that no one else dared to voice. They hope that within those pages there will be names, priests, bishops, or even cardinals who have evaded accountability. For them, the diaries are not just history. They are a beacon of hope. Therefore, the question now is no longer whether Pope Francis was silenced. The real question is, are his words powerful enough to overcome the imposed silence? And this has brought the story of a beloved pope to a heartbreaking turning point. 5. Final legacy left to the world. His legacy was not recorded on marble tablets or shiny medals displayed in church libraries. It exists in simple, humble actions, a caring glance, a gentle gesture, or a soft word for those who need attention. This is what he left for each member of his family, and Maria Elena is the last to carry the flesh and blood of her late brother. I see him in every kind act, even the smallest, she shared. That's the legacy he left for me. Not the papal hat, not the shining gold vestments. It was love. Say. The day Pope Francis passed away, his real name, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, was called once again as a final farewell. The entire church participated in a sacred farewell ceremony staged with the utmost reverence of the Vatican. Light streamed through the dome of the Sistine Chapel. Cardinals in deep red robes stood in line, and world leaders sent sincere condolences. A historical moment, broadcast live worldwide. Pope Francis was not just a figurehead of the church. He was a man who sacrificed much to keep that image pure. Jorge lived with sorrow not only tied to religion, but also the sorrow of a lonely soul. Marla recalls how Jorge fed sparrows with leftover breadcrumbs and the way he called her Nana, a sweet term in Spanish. These memories were never recorded in church documents, but they are the roots that formed a man who bowed to the world's pain, who listened to the small things. What moved people was not only how she remembered him with all sweetness, but the sincerity in her words. He wasn't perfect. Maria Elena did not paint her brother as a saint. She admits that he made mistakes, sometimes serious ones, but he always strived to do what was right. In a world filled with demands for perfection from public figures, that admission resonated like a wave touching millions of hearts. She did not hide moments of doubt, long silences, or scars on the soul. She only wanted to emphasize one thing. He always chose love, even when that love brought him pain. Pope Francis also left a profound mark with his strong commitment to social justice and protecting the poor. As a son of Argentina, he brought a Southern Hemisphere perspective to the Vatican, where injustice and poverty are daily realities. His apostolic exhortation Evangelii Gaudium criticized the killer economy of unchecked capitalism and called on world leaders to prioritize the most vulnerable. He regularly met with homeless people, refugees, and prisoners, performing acts such as washing the feet of Muslims and Hindus on Holy Thursday. Posts on X hailed him as the Pope of the Poor, with one user writing, "Francis doesn't just talk about compassion, he lives for it." This legacy has inspired social movements worldwide, from charitable organizations to campaigns against injustice. Environmental protection is another groundbreaking part of Pope Francis's legacy. His message, Laudato Si' 2015, considered the Church's first green document, called for urgent action against climate change and the protection of humanity's common home. This document was not only aimed at Catholic believers, but called on everyone worldwide, highlighting the link between the environment and social justice. Laudato Si' has been cited by the United Nations in Sustainable Development reports, and Francis became an important voice in global climate conferences. According to Reuters, environmental activists, like Greta Thunberg, expressed respect for him, even though they were not Catholic. This legacy has driven parishes and Catholic organizations worldwide to implement green initiatives, from using renewable energy to recycling campaigns. Church reform is an inseparable part of Francis's legacy, though not without controversy. He worked tirelessly to address financial corruption in the Vatican Bank, firing officials linked to money laundering activities and hiring independent auditors. Francis also established the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors to address sexual abuse cases, publicly apologizing to the victims and instituting stricter regulations. Pope Francis's interfaith and peace legacy also left a deep impact. He expanded dialogue with other religions, meeting with Muslim, Jewish, and Buddhist leaders, with his historic visit to the United Arab Emirates in 2019 being a highlight, where he signed the Abu Dhabi Declaration on Human Fraternity. Francis also spoke strongly against wars, from the conflict in Ukraine to the Middle East, urging world leaders to prioritize peace above all political interests. According to the BBC, his trips to war zones like Iraq and South Sudan demonstrated courage and a commitment to bringing hope to those suffering. This legacy solidified the Vatican's role as a center for global reconciliation. Jorge Mario's brother did not need to be hailed as a saint. He simply needed to be remembered as a person who always chose kindness, no matter the cost. Maria Elena did not seek glory for her brother. She only hoped that people would remember him as a simple man. A brother, not a supernatural figure, but a human being with flaws, wrong decisions, and right actions. Pope Francis, the soul guide with humility, gentleness, and compassion, has passed away. However, his life is not over, because Maria Elena, his only surviving sister, has broken the silence. What she shared was not solemn teachings or the grandeur of the Vatican, but the dark secrets the Pope gathered throughout his life. What do you think about this story? If you found it interesting, please leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapters in this story.